Okay, so a couple of notes. I have QR codes in this presentation, mostly for people watching videos who want a second screen. But if you're not aware of this, your iPhone has built-in QR code reader in the camera, if you want to follow along. Okay, so this whole opening was awesome, but it's not really how we do things in Hawaii, because it's very fancy, and Tahitian dancers are expensive, because they have to come all the way from Tahiti. What we do is we do a rousing group aloha. This is how we actually open events in Hawaii. So I'm going to need your participation for this. This is how it's going to work. I'm going to count to 3, and then we're all going to have a big aloha, okay? Get your lungs ready, because without enough aloha, this whole thing's not going to work, okay? Okay. 1, 2, 3. Aloha! There it is. There's the aloha. Okay, very good. We're doing it wrong, plus aloha state facts. I am Mike Lee. I did grow up in Hawaii. Went to the University of Hawaii, or if you're from Hawaii, I went to Roosevelt. That's all you need to know. Hawaii is a really weird place to be from. It's very different than everybody assumes it is. When I tell people I'm from Hawaii, people say, wow, that's awesome, I'm so jealous. Because they're thinking of sitting on a beach and having somebody bring them tropical drinks. But when you're from Hawaii, you bring the tropical drinks. It's not quite the same experience. It's also a weird place because it's very different from kind of every other place, especially every other place in the United States. For one thing, there is almost no situation in Hawaii where it is not socially acceptable to wear flip-flops. Or as we call them in the islands, raba slippers. Slippers are like the perfect shoe for the climate and the culture of Hawaii for a number of reasons. They're easy to take off before you enter someone's house, as is the tradition there. You can wear them to the beach, which is very convenient. And if you run into one of our famous island cockroaches, you can wield it as a weapon, which is very important. I understood where he was coming from, but I was taken rather aback when a friend of mine actually offered to teach me how to tie my shoes. Okay, yes, it's true that we don't typically wear lacing shoes in Hawaii, but we do learn how to tie our shoes in Hawaii. Like, I know how to tie my shoes, see? I know how to do that. Even in the islands, when you're a young child, they teach you how to tie your shoes. You don't do it very often, but we do know how to tie my shoes. So I said, no, thank you. I don't need you to teach me how to tie my shoes. I know how to tie my shoes. Thank you very much. And he said, okay. But what is this other hole for? And I said, well, I don't know. I've always assumed it was in case you had like really small ankles. You could like choke up using the other hole. But no, apparently not. Actually, what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to pass the lace back through the other hole to make a loop, and then you put the laces through these loops before you cinch it to make a nice tight knot. I had no idea. I've been doing this wrong pretty much my entire life. The other thing he said is that when you actually cinch the laces, when you make that knot there, that actually puts a lot of pressure on the tongue of the shoe. If you do like a double wrap, you get a nice flat knot which really distributes pressure across the top of the shoe. Now I bring this up not just to make it very clear to everyone that I know how to tie my shoes, but also because I feel like this represents 2 types of being wrong, right? First we have the type of wrong where I thought I knew how it worked, but actually it worked differently than I actually thought. I was able to get by, but it wasn't actually working the way that I thought it was working. And the other kind of wrong is, it wasn't really wrong, but there was just sort of a more optimal way of doing things. I like these 2 kinds of wrong because this is exactly how I feel in my day job using instruments to profile and optimize code. Because when you're doing code optimization, people tend to think that you're going to find something that is slow and then you're going to do it in a way that is faster. But almost never is this the case. Almost always, when there's a performance problem, it's not what people think it is. It's always like a bug where you think a function is being called one time, but it's actually being called like 1,000 times per second. This is the kind of thing that the profiler does for you, is it shows you kind of the truth of things. Xcode, or whatever you use to edit your source code with, it's kind of like a wish engine. You put your greatest dreams for the application into it. The profiler is how you actually see the truth. But there's a third way of being wrong, which is not so much a shoe tying thing, but I always think about this when I brush my teeth. See, here's how I've always brushed my teeth. I brush my teeth, and then I floss most of the time, and then I rinse with mouthwash, right? It's pretty normal. But actually, no. So apparently, you're not supposed to use mouthwash. They're saying now that mouthwash might actually cause cancer. And actually, you're not even supposed to rinse after you brush your teeth at all. You're supposed to just let the toothpaste sit there for a couple of hours. And so, now I've actually moved the flossing in front of the brushing. But then I was reading that you're actually not supposed to really brush your teeth after meals, because your teeth are very soft after you eat, and so the enamel is actually very sensitive. So all you're really supposed to do between meals is just floss and then just rinse with plain water. So now this is what I do. Although I was just at the dentist a couple days ago, and she said that I need to stop flossing my back teeth and start using a wooden toothpick. So I've kind of given up on knowing how to brush my teeth. And I think that this is how most information actually is. We want knowledge to be sort of static and simple, but it almost never is. Information is always changing, knowledge is always shifting, and it's really easy to become frustrated when the truth always seems to be changing. It's really easy to say, you know what, screw experts, scientists don't know what they're doing, I'm just going to start doing things based on rumor and hearsay. I think what this really speaks to is how we as individuals think about being wrong, right? For most of my life growing up, I've always tried to avoid the appearance of being wrong, because I felt like being wrong was being weak. But now I understand that that's actually the opposite of the truth, that being wrong it's kind of the ultimate power move, because not only can you admit when you're wrong about something, but wrongness is just ignorance leaving your body. Right? And so it's the more wrong you are, the more you're continuously improving. And if you are continuously improving, you should always look back on your past self with a certain sense of embarrassment at how wrong you used to be. So let me tell you a few things about my home state of Hawaii. This is the 50th state of the Union. It was admitted in 1959. This is where we get the expression 5-0, like when you talk about the police from Hawaii 5-0, because we're the 50th state. The 50th state, that's 5-0. There's some confusion about this, especially among Alaskans, many of whom think that they are the 50th state. In fact, I used to work for Alaska Airlines, and in the opening video that they showed us, it opened with the words, Alaska, the 50th state. And I was just like, excuse me. Here in the back with the Aloha shirt, I have to object to that. Hawaii is the 50th state. The confusion is because Hawaii actually had been trying to become a state for a really long time, but the population in Hawaii is almost exclusively Asian, and so Congress blocked admission of Hawaii as a state on racial grounds until finally the sort of rich white people who ran the place eventually figured out that they could actually just bribe Congress, and that's how Hawaii ended up becoming a state. The official languages of Hawaii are Hawaiian and English. Not many Hawaiian speakers, not many English speakers either, actually. The state flag of Hawaii is this very colorful thing. The 8 bars representing the 8 islands of Hawaii. The British flag representing the strange and unique relationship that the islands have had with the United Kingdom. The state motto, of course, Ua mau ka ea o ka aina I ka pono, as you know. What does this mean? This means the life of the land is perpetuated in righteousness. What does that mean? I have no idea, but it sounds amazing. What I do know, though, is the name of the state fish, which is, of course, the humuhumu nukunuku apua'a. That name again, the humuhumu nukunuku apua'a. So speaking of being wrong, one of the things that I get to do nowadays is I get to travel around the world, often with the Dutch embassy, because I live in Amsterdam now. And I get to talk to people around the world about business. And I also host a kind of a weekly business chat in Amsterdam, where I get to sit down and talk to people about business all day long. And I have to say, people do not understand business in general. Think about business all wrong. First of all, when I talk to people about business, they usually come in and they say, I have this idea. It's like, right off the bat, wrong. This is not how business works. You do not just come up with ideas and then sort of crap them out and then expect them to kind of take flight and start sending you money. That's just not how the market works. If you want to make money in business, what you have to do is you have to find something where somebody is already spending money on some problem that takes them a lot of time and costs them a lot of money, and then create a solution for them that will enable them to spend less time and less money. So it's a no-brainer to buy your product, and then all you have to do is just take a little slice of that, and there is your income. That's what we call a value proposition. That's how you're successful in business. I don't know, actually I do know where this idea came from. It's because we all go to school and we all work for corporations, right? And when you work for a school or a corporation, they tell you that you should be creative, right? Just let your creativity fly. And that's because in neither of those situations do you actually have to make any money, right? You're not expected to make money as part of a school. And even though corporations themselves have to make money, the people within the corporations typically are not tasked with making money directly. And so you have the freedom to sort of be creative and sort of apply your creativity. But when you actually go into the market, unless you have a lot of money and you just want to go into business for fun and you don't mind failing most of the time to get your ideas out there, then by all means do it this way. But if you actually want to make money in business, do it the boring way first. People think you need to be evil to make money. You really just need to be boring. Do something boring, and then you'll be fine. The other thing that we don't really think about the right way in business is sleep. I think that our whole relationship with sleep is very wrong. We have this tendency to just really, we don't like sleep, right? It's a kind of built-in, if you say like, oh, I only got 4 hours of sleep last night, nobody says, wow, that's really stupid. People say like, oh, wow, you must be very busy. You must be working very hard. There's this sort of cult of being busy, which means not sleeping. And not sleeping is equated with being busy, and being busy is equated with being important. And we all like to be important. I myself am very guilty of this. I've given entire presentations about the joy of sleep deprivation. I heard something recently, though, that really changed my mind about this, which was on NPR, this show Every Little Thing. They did an episode called Your Bedtime is Killing You, where they brought some science to bear. Here's the thing. I enjoy sleep deprivation. It's a fun kind of drug. It's very, very bad for you. When you don't get enough sleep, you raise your blood sugar level to the level of a pre-diabetic. You increase your risk of heart attack by 45%. You increase your risk of cancer by 40%. You might as well smoke cigarettes, right? Like, you can smoke, you're totally free to do that, but you need to be aware of the fact that you're seriously damaging your body when you do that. And I don't think we really realize how much we damage our body when we don't sleep, right? We sleep for a reason. Just the toxins that build up in your brain every day that are taken care of by the sleeping process will lead to early onset Alzheimer's if they're not allowed to be cleaned out of the brain. It's so bad that we just saw a spike in heart attacks from the hour time shift of daylight saving time. Just losing that hour actually has a significant effect on the population as a whole. Another podcast that touches on this from This American Life is the episode Human Error in Volatile Situations, which talks about how the US Navy shares our industry's hatred of sleep and how this has been causing a lot of really tragic and embarrassing accidents. I don't know if you've been paying attention, but there have been multiple ship collisions, all caused by the fact that the crews on these ships are not sleeping. Another thing that a lot of us think about the wrong way are refunds. This was actually something that I learned early on in my career. I did a 3-year apprenticeship in software engineering, and part of this was dealing with all the customer service. And I would always want to argue against refunds because it felt really wrong to me to give people money back when they already used our product. But my mentor was very clear about this. He said, if somebody wants a refund, we give them a refund until we can't give refunds anymore, and then maybe we'll have a policy. And the reason for this is simple. We don't want unhappy customers. They're not worth the money, right? We only want happy customers, and we don't want to be in the habit of working in this way. We want to be in the habit of not only making something that people will pay for, but that's something that people are genuinely grateful for, right? We want our customers to wish they could give us more money, right? But there's something else about this. This is another episode of This American Life that I heard recently called 5 Women. This was a real, I mean, first of all, it was an hour of amazing radio, but a real gut punch to hear, and really interesting stuff. I mean, there's a lot of takeaways from this, but one of the really big things for me was just the way that our society, as our society shifts, the way that we view consent is shifting. And this is something that's very important to pay attention to, not just as men, for the men in the audience, but as business people in general. I think that we as an industry are running into a problem with consent that is going to end up causing us a lot of damage. And I believe that because other industries have played the games that we're playing, and they have suffered for it and had to change their ways. I think medicine is a really clear example of this, where it used to be in medicine that the doctor would show up, give you a 50-page document, and say, sign here. That's an awful lot like what we do every time people download our software. And eventually, after riots, the doctors had to adopt something called informed consent, which doesn't mean here's a 50-page document, you're informed, now consent. It means I am responsible for making sure that you understand what you're agreeing to. This is the foundation of ethical behavior, and this is something that we as an industry are going to have to adopt. I actually gave a talk about this called Ethics Made Easy, which goes into all this ethics stuff. But for now, let me tell you some more about the Aloha state. So Hawaii is an island state composed of 8 main islands smack in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. That big red one there is the island of Hawaii, for which the state of Hawaii is named, and that's thanks to this guy, Kamehameha the Great, who used British cannons to defeat the chiefs of the other islands and unify these disparate island kingdoms into the single kingdom of Hawaii, or more properly, the single kingdom of Hawaii. This extra little letter here is not an apostrophe, actually. It's upside down apostrophe, what we call okina. And it's actually a consonant representing a glottal stop in the Hawaiian alphabet, which is the smallest alphabet in the world with only 13 letters, 5 vowels and 8 consonants, including okina. Okina is the forgotten letter of the Hawaiian alphabet, and it's a very important letter because, for example, without the okina, beautiful Pe'epe'e Falls just loses some of the majesty. Let's talk about how we think about code. Of course, I could go on about code. I'll try to keep it a couple of small things. Somehow, the idea of coding style has become, next to religion and politics, something we just don't talk about at work. I have been on so many projects where it's just like nobody wants to tell anybody else how to code. Right? Everybody just wants to let everybody do their own thing, and that way we all get along, and everything is hunky-dory, except when it's not, which is all the time. I've worked on, I would say 80% of my projects have not had a style guide, and 20% of my projects have had a style guide, and I am a religious devotee of style guides. I am a religious devotee of enforcing a common style across an entire code base for a couple of reasons. First of all, ego does not belong in code. I stopped putting my name on code years ago. When Xcode gives that template and puts my name there, I erase that. I put my client's name. I don't want my name on my code. I don't want you to look at my code and know that it's my code. I don't want you to look at code that I'm working on and know who wrote what code. That's ridiculous. It's code. It's not supposed to have a little extra panache, That's what design is for. The code itself needs to follow a style. The other thing about this is that when you have somebody join your team and you say, this is how we do things here, and they refuse to do things that way because they like to do things their way, that is a huge red flag. And actually forcing people to do something that the team has agreed on is a great way of testing people if they're actually going to be able to be part of a team. The other thing is, if you've ever had the unfortunate situation where you run into a copy-paste programmer, which is somebody who doesn't actually know how to program at all, but knows how to search Stack Overflow and then sort of paste things in until they work. Copy-paste programmers cannot follow a style guide because they literally cannot see the difference between what they pasted in and what they're actually supposed to do. So this is just, it's the best way to catch fraud, and it's the best way to catch people whose egos are too large for the team. I want to talk a little about naming things. They say that naming things is one of the hardest problems in computer science, and from what I've seen, I believe it. You know, I see this kind of thing all the time, right? Where you're talking about like for object in array. And it's like, I never want to see an object called object. I never want to see an array called array. And yet, a lot of projects I work on, that's how everything, like every single array is called array. Which is like, first of all, how are you supposed to search for anything? But second of all, like, why do we even have names for things if we're just going to do this to ourselves, right? Like they're objects, give them names, right? For card in deck, you know? And no single letter variable names, ever. Oh my God. Like, if your string is called S, forget it, right? You have an array called A, ugh. And this is the hardcore, not even this. Not even this. Because why do we even do this? Why do we even have this? Do you even know? It's because of Fortran. I don't know if any of you know Fortran, but in Fortran you couldn't just have any iterators you want. You had to use the pre-assigned iterators you were given, which were called I, J, and K. And that convention has just sort of stayed with us, and now we all just go around doing this all the time without really thinking about what we're doing or why we're limiting ourselves to the rules of Fortran when those rules no longer apply, right? It's not I, it's an index, right? And more than that, it's not just an index, it's some kind of index, right? Like, give variables descriptive names. I'm just putting that out there. I'm sure most of you do this, but experience tells me most of you don't. But here's my number one pet peeve of code. I'm not inclined to say that things are stupid, but this is stupid. Somewhere along the way, somebody had this idea that it is a good thing for every function to have a single point of return, and that early returns are a feature that should not have been added to the language, and that as good programmers we should avoid early returns, and we should instead nest our scope so that our code looks like this, where you just have so much indentation that doesn't mean anything. Or even worse, code that looks like this, where it's like if, error, so that nothing is localized, nothing makes any sense. First of all, anybody who tells you that you shouldn't use a feature of a coding language is leading you astray. This kind of macho bullshit needs to be stamped out of the industry. The other thing is there's no gain to actually having a single point of return. There's not. I've been told that it makes debugging easier, but I rewrite all the code that I'm debugging. I don't know these people who are afraid of like rewriting code. Like, the code should be a living thing. It shouldn't be dead, or else no one's going to know how it works. This is what I want code to look like. I want absolute resistance to indentation. I want early returns. I want early error checking. I do not want to see indentation at all. If you're indenting, it's because you had to indent, because you have an if statement or a for statement. When you do this way, not only does it make it a hell of a lot easier to read on a small screen, but it actually makes the indentation directly correlated to the algorithmic complexity of the code. So that when you look at the shape of the code, you can see where you might run into trouble. Like, you see that double indent there? That's a potential n-squared algorithmic complexity. That's something that needs to be checked out. You give that up when you give up strict indentation of code, to my mind, for nothing. Let's talk about the Aloha state. So there are a couple of things that we do in Hawaii that are very different than the rest of the world, and maybe different than you might think. Leis are an obvious example. We do wear leis in Hawaii all the time. Not like this, actual flower leis. Maybe you learn to make them at home when you're a kid, or you can buy them like at every store all the time, anywhere. And you can just wear a lei yourself. You just buy a lei for yourself and wear it if you feel like looking a little fancy, especially on Friday. It's very popular to wear a lei on Aloha Friday. But a lot of times it's just when you want to honor a friend. I was hanging out with, I was back in Hawaii a couple weeks ago hanging out with some old friends of mine, and one of my friends was his birthday. So I went ahead and just bought him a lei so that he could just wear that, and people would just be like, oh, like, why are you wearing a lei? Like, what's the occasion, just bring a little honor into people. Aloha Atire is another thing that we do wear in Hawaii all the time. Like I said, this is just my regular shirt. This is in no way a special outfit. But it's a little bit more complicated than this. There's actually a lot of different kinds of Aloha Attire. Aloha Attire is almost always appropriate, but not every Aloha shirt is appropriate for every occasion. Maybe you can't tell, but these are 6 extremely different patterns, right? Like this one up here in the upper left, that's like something a bank president would wear. That's an extremely fancy, like $100 Aloha shirt. On the other side, that's something a bank employee would wear. That's actually a uniform shirt from the Bank of Hawaii. That pineapple shirt might cost you $800 if it's vintage. That one's not. This is my funeral shirt here in the corner here. But I want to tell you a little bit about the history of the Aloha shirt, because I hear all kinds of weird theories behind this, and this is what we grew up in Hawaii being told. So if you look at most Aloha shirts, especially fancy ones, it's like they're made inside out, where the actual bright side of the fabric with the stuff printed on it is on the inside, and the outside is just like very muted. And this has to do with the history of this shirt. You see, after the end of the kingdom, you had the colonial days where you basically had the island run by an oligarchy of plantation owners who imported labor from all over, mostly Asia. And so you ended up having all of these men come to work, and then eventually after some time, you started to have like picture brides where women would start to come out to join them, and people would get wives. And the wives would make shirts for their husbands. And among the Japanese workers, the fabric that they had available was their kimono fabric, which is very colorful and printed. And so in order to adapt to the local culture, they cut up the kimono fabric, they turned it into a Western-style shirt, and they turned it inside out to try to hide the pattern. But that actually became sort of a very standard look, and then that spread to the other ethnic groups in Hawaii and eventually became something associated with the islands. So a little bit of trivia for you. Pidgin, I mentioned the official languages are Hawaiian and English. The language everyone actually speaks is called Pidgin. I'm not going to try to teach you Pidgin. It would be ridiculous. I will tell you the story of Pidgin, though, because I think it really says something about the islands. When the workers came from all over the world, the strategy was that they would not be able to communicate with each other because they would speak separate languages, and therefore they would not be able to unionize. But what ended up happening was that sort of nature finds a way, and all of these different people from all of these different places speaking languages like Hawaiian and English, Portuguese, Japanese, Korean, Cantonese, Tagalog, Ilocano, some Puerto Ricans in there, they all formed this sort of common language, which is everyone's second language in the islands, which is Pidgin. It's how we mostly communicate with each other, and it's also a way to annoy tourists. Especially with decline, which is like the most confusing word in any language, because it's every part of speech and it goes everywhere. Like you can say, I like decline, but I know can decline because decline. It's like, yep, get them. Potluck. Hawaii is a potluck culture. Potluck is when you have like a party and everybody brings a dish. We call that potluck, which is very common in Hawaii because people don't have a lot of money. But it's also a potluck culture. You have all these different ethnic groups, you have people from all these different backgrounds, and you're sort of expected in Hawaii to kind of bring your, wherever you come from, to kind of bring that with you, and to kind of mix that together in kind of a fusion of intersections that are just kind of more interesting for everybody. So Hawaii is it's a very ethnically diverse place, and it's has a really great way of dealing with that diversity. I'm really glad that I grew up there because it's really helped me to sort of understand, diversity and living in a diverse place and not being too married to one particular language or culture. Like when I'm sitting around and I hear like 7 different languages being spoken, I'm much more comfortable than if I know what everyone is saying. Let's talk about how we think about the team. I would say one of the biggest things that I've had to learn in my career is sort of how you go from this kind of solo hero to how you go to being part of a team. I think it's very natural, especially given a lot of us, I think we end up being the weird computer person in our group, and we end up kind of doing things by ourselves. A lot of times, you're overnight, in the bedroom, all the lights are off, and all your friends are out having fun, but you're having better fun because you're using the computer. And so, you tend to be that person who everyone thinks is like the genius. Nobody knows how computers work, but you come in and you turn it off and on again, and everyone thinks you're amazing. But you kind of have to get over that, because at a certain point you reach the limitations of what one person can do, and you really want to be able to tap the diversity of all the people around you and all their different skills come to bear. But I think that there are also certain members of the team that we tend to underappreciate. Number one, marketing. I was just talking to somebody at my business chat last week, and the first thing out of their mouths were, I left that company because they were only concerned with marketing. Marketing is not how you change the world. I think the Coca-Cola company would disagree with the statement that marketing is not how you change the world. I think that marketing is a very powerful weapon that can be used for good or for evil. But I'll say this, if you make a product and you don't market it, all your suffering is for nothing, because no one will know about it. No one will use it. Marketing is how you multiply what you've done. You've made the thing, and now your marketeers can go out there and just keep bringing that to people over and over and over again. That delight that you want to bring to people, that's what your marketing people are for. I used to basically plan a development budget that excluded marketing. Nowadays, if I plan a development budget, I take the budget at the end and then I double it for marketing. Marketing is so important. UX designers are very poorly appreciated on most teams. In fact, UX designers are not even on most teams, because you have UI designers and you have engineers, and between the two of us, we feel like UX is something that we can do. But I think that this actually has caused us to run into, I think we're doing this wrong. Because here's the problem, is that when you have a design, what tends to happen is we have this design-first way of implementing, where you bring in this graphical designer, right, which is really somebody who's using Photoshop, and they're sort of like visualizing how they want this thing to look and how they want it to work, right? And so you have to do all these sort of adaptations and hacks to get the framework to behave not as it was designed, but as your designer has envisioned. But the problem is that design changes fast, because engineering is slow and design is fast. And so you can have 3-4 design revisions before you've even finished with the last design revision. So most projects I've worked on have ended up in a state of we're just constantly trying to keep up with these design changes. And every time there's a design change, there's a new set of hacks. And so we end up just stacking hacks on hacks on hacks on hacks. And then we have this architecture, which isn't so much an architecture, it's just a giant hack pile, which only makes sense in the historical context of all the different design changes. I think a better way of doing this would be to bring in a UX designer who does not use Photoshop and who just sits there and uses the standard behaviors and widgetry of the framework to build an application based entirely on the user's experience, not on custom graphics, not on how it should look, but just stock standard application. And that should be the master branch. And then when you have the custom Photoshop design, you make a branch from that, and then you do all the hacks on that branch. And so when you have a design change, you can take your undesigned UX path, and then you can just make a new branch, make a new branch, make a new branch, and not stack hacks on hacks on hacks on hacks. Finally, I think QA people are really underappreciated. Most professional companies understand the value of good QA. But I think that this is something that we all have to learn, because a QA person is like a person who's criticizing you, and it doesn't feel nice, right? And so you really want to be defensive about the feedback that they're giving you, but it's stupid because you're paying them to do that to you, because the market is much worse, right? You want to embarrass yourself in private so you can fix it before you embarrass yourself in public, right? So the thing about this is that I came to realize some time ago that society itself also has QA people. You know what I'm talking about? I'm talking about, when you hear from feminists, right? When you hear from Black Lives Matter, right? When you hear from dissidents, right? When you hear from people who are criticizing the culture, it's really easy to kind of take that personally and want to kind of be defensive and argumentative about the things that they're pointing out to you. But it's the same mistake as being rude to QA people, right? People who point out the flaws in our society are just, they're our There are society's QA people, and they need to be treated with the same kind of respect because it has a very real impact on how we operate. There was a fascinating Twitter thread some time ago about, somebody had basically said, like, let's not try to make science about social justice. And this entomologist said, actually, it's funny you say that, because the way that we think about society has a direct impact on the way that we do science. For thousands of years, we talked about king bees instead of queen bees and slave bees instead of worker bees because everything was male-dominated and slavery was okay. Well, slavery was never okay, but it was accepted. And so, like, that ignorance holds us back the same way that being ignorant about bugs in your application hold you back. Let's talk about the pride of the Aloha state, which is hokulea. Hokulea is a voyaging canoe that's built and operated by the Polynesian Voyaging Society. Hokulea represents the rebirth of the Polynesian navigation system. We now understand that Polynesians were the greatest navigators that the world has ever known, that they're able to use stars and ocean currents and like 100 other things to freely navigate oceans long before Europeans ever thought that there was anything more than dragons in those waters. We now understand this, but it took us forever to figure this out. In fact, before Hokulea, the most common theory was the Kon-Tiki theory, pushed by Thor Heyerdahl. When you look for tiki stuff online, you run into a lot of Kon-Tiki stuff, which is frustrating. Kon-Tiki. So here's the basic problem. You have things from South America like sweet potatoes all over Polynesia. And so there's two possible explanations for this. One is that the Polynesians were the greatest navigators that the world has ever known. The other is that the settling of Polynesia started from South America and that basically Native Americans set out on primitive rafts and just sort of drifted with the ocean currents to the various islands, and that Polynesia was sort of settled on accident and not, in fact, a thriving global empire of trade. In Hawaii, this is seen as just the epitome of racism holding back science. And not just holding back our understanding of things, but literally, there was one navigator left in the world. And if they had waited 5 more years to look for him, all of that knowledge would have been lost, and we would have just gone forward in ignorance and not known about one of the most just amazing, fascinating stories in the history of the world, the history of the settlement of Oceania from Taiwan. So let's talk about how we think about the world. Some things that I think that, maybe not that we get wrong, but that the world gets wrong, which will kind of tend to make us question ourselves. My dedication is to engineering. I'm a programmer. I do program. But above all that, I'm an engineer, which means I'm a solver of problems. I typically use programming to solve those because I'm a software engineer. But engineering is a greater field than this. And I have seen these past few years a real effort to deprofessionalize software engineering and all these articles which come out and say, hey, programmers, you're not an engineer. And these tend to be predicated on a couple of ideas. One is the idea that engineering has real impact on the world. Engineering has limitations. Software does not. Only somebody who's never had to program an actual computer would think that software doesn't have limitations. Software definitely has limitations. But more than that, people have limitations, and that's what engineering is really all about. I've also heard somebody try to say that engineers have a code of ethics, whereas programmers do not. And I believe that this is the idea that is behind the deprofessionalization of software engineering, because I believe that because software engineering is currently being used to destroy the world, that we are basically, they don't want us to think about what we're doing. They don't want us to consider ourselves part of the bigger picture. They don't want us to have ethics in what we do. They want us to sit down, program the computer, eat the pizza, drink the beer, and shut up. And I think that we need to fight that. I think that we need to resist that. Because engineering is, I think, the most powerful force that nature has ever created. It is the way that nature acts intelligently. I think it's important that we as engineers have a good perspective for where we fit into the world and where we as modern people fit into history. If you think of the story of your career as having started when you sat down at a computer, you're thinking too narrowly. And if you think about software as something that started in the 70s, you're thinking too narrowly. The story of our civilization and the part that we're playing in it actually goes much, much, much farther back. I would say all the way to the discovery of the Americas, or at least as far back as the advent of Alexander von Humboldt. This is a great biography of Alexander von Humboldt who came out recently. You've probably never heard of him, but you've definitely heard his name, since he has more stuff named after him than any other person in history. Alexander von Humboldt was the first person who ever put together the fact that we do not live in a giant machine built by God for the pleasure of humans, but rather a complicated, interrelated web of different organisms competing against each other in what we now call an ecosystem. The idea that the climate and the things that live upon the earth are somehow related, the idea that destroying organisms on the earth could have an impact on the climate, this all goes back to something like 1802 with the work of Alexander von Humboldt. When somebody tells you that we've known about climate change since the 70s, they're being disingenuous. We've known about climate change since early 1800. What we have known is about the specifics of climate change. We've had the ability to model climate change on computers since the 70s. I gave a presentation about this very topic of world modeling and how we can use computers to understand the system, where the system has come from, and where the system is going. And then I did a follow-up called planetary engineering, which is sort of and then what do we do about it? What is our role in all of this talk? I guess what it comes down to is responsibility. We need to take responsibility for the work that we do, but we also need to take responsibility for the world that we find ourselves in. We use this word dharma. The Hawaiians have their own word for it, kuleana. Kuleana is both your responsibility and your privilege. It's sort of the thing that you were born into doing. I think of it as sort of the problems that present themselves. It's really easy for us to look at the kind of world's biggest problems and want to tackle those problems head on, but there's not really anything we can do about those things. I think that really kuleana is about finding the things that you yourself can change. So here's a story. I recently slipped down a flight of stairs and hurt myself quite badly. And I slipped down that flight of stairs because of an unsafe situation, which has actually existed for some time. And I realized that the reason why I slipped down those stairs was because no one has done anything about this unsafe situation. And I realized it was my kuleana to tackle this problem, because I was the one who had run into it. I was the one who had the ability to fix it. And if I don't accept my kuleana, then someone else is going to be injured later on. So I think that not only learning to accept responsibility, but also learning to find responsibility that's small enough that you can actually act on it is very important. Let's talk about the food in Hawaii. Very unique. I could actually give a whole presentation about the food in Hawaii. There's a whole Wikipedia article about other Wikipedia articles about the food of Hawaii. We're going to have a luau tonight. Of course, the most, literally the staple of the Hawaiian people is poi, which is made by mashing taro root into a starchy paste. I'm told that there's not going to be poi at the luau, but they said if I really wanted some, they could put purple food dye and Elmer's glue. That's about right. It takes getting used to. Most delicious things take getting used to. I don't think most people enjoyed their first beer or a cup of coffee or bite of Marmite, but all those things are delicious once you get used to them. But there is a trick to poi. So a very common Hawaiian food is actually kalua pig. We are definitely going to have some pork. Kalua pig is traditionally made in a pit oven. But the only problem with this, it's a very familiar food to most people who find poi very foreign. But it is kind of salty and greasy. If you ever find yourself in Hawaii or at a luau where they're serving poi, mostly just to watch you squirm, here's how you can fool them. Take the kalua pig and dip it in the poi, because the saltiness and greasiness of the pig and the starchiness and blandness of the poi actually go really well together. And I've hated poi my entire life. I had this last week when I was in Hawaii, and I actually craved poi. I actually went to the store and bought poi for the first time in my life because Kalua pig and poi is actually really good together. Also great to dip in poi is poke. We're also not going to have poke, but there's like a worldwide trend of poke right now. Like there's so many poke places in Amsterdam. And the thing is, none of them serve poke, and I find that very frustrating. Poke is a fish salad where you have fish, maybe some fish eggs, some seaweed, some onions, some sesame seeds, a little soy sauce, a little sesame oil. It's a salad. It's not like a lettuce and tomato salad. It's a salad like a potato salad is a salad. And you could take a potato salad and you could add it to a lettuce salad and have like a potato salad salad, but don't mistake that as being potato salad and think that if you add potatoes to lettuce, that's a potato salad. Because that's what's happened to to poke, where they added poke to a bowl with rice and vegetables, and then they said, oh, that's poke. And then they forgot about the poke, and now they just add raw fish to rice and vegetables and call it poke, but that's not poke, that's just raw fish and rice and vegetables. Poke is something very specific. This bothers me. I worry that I'm going to go to Hawaii and all the poke places are going to shift to selling mainland-style poke, and I'm not going to be able to get good poke, and that is what we call cultural appropriation. Okay, I have a few more things. I'm going to do kind of a lightning round of things. Let's talk about disappointment, specifically my personal relationship to disappointment. Teamwork is a big lesson I've had to learn, but this is another huge lesson I've had to learn is how I relate to disappointment. I typically would think that the people who had never disappointed me were my true friends, and that once somebody disappointed me, that we couldn't be friends anymore. And now I realize that that's not only wrong, but it's actually really dangerous. Because people who haven't disappointed you yet, they're not any better. You just don't have the information, right? It's like assuming that no news is good news. No news is not always good news. In fact, I've come to think of friendship as a true friend is someone where you know how they're going to disappoint you, right? When someone disappoints you, you should cherish that disappointment because you're learning the limits of your relationship with that person, and in doing so, you're making that relationship more real. Another thing that we get wrong is how we think about emotions. I learned this really recently. This is super interesting. We tend to think of emotions as being both innate, like irresistible, right? If I feel a certain way, that means something, and universal, right? You assume that, like, I get mad, I get scared, I get angry, I get sad. Everyone experiences those things, but it turns out that's actually not true at all. Every emotion that you experience somewhere in the world is a culture that does not experience that emotion. And there are other cultures that experience emotions that you've never heard of. There is a 2-part episode from the NPR show Invisibilia about this fact. I found this life-changing information. Emotions are something that have just plagued me my entire life, and actually realizing that your emotions are actually a cultural construct where very vague sensations from your body are interpreted by the concepts that you've been taught and then converted into the emotions of fear and anger and all of that kind of stuff. But none of that stuff is real. You can have complete control over it if you realize that really you're not angry, you're uncomfortable. Right? And you're angry because your culture has taught you to be angry, and that there are cultures in the world that don't experience anger. We tend to get history very wrong, and this has a very large impact on how we operate. If you're interested in Hawaii and the history of Hawaii, I really love this book by Sarah Vowell. I love all of Sarah Vowell's books, and when I found out she was doing one about Hawaii, I was like so thrilled. It's such a great book. I love this because when you learn about Hawaiian history in Hawaii, you learn a very sanitized version of Hawaiian history where, all of the Hawaiians had the purest of intentions and nobody ever did anything wrong. You don't learn that Kamehameha used British weapons to take over the islands. You don't learn that, Kalakaua was called the Merry Monarch also because he was drunk all the time. Things like that. Very good book. I gave a presentation recently about parts of history that we get wrong, specifically about race and the history of race and racism in our country. I'm actually kind of obsessed with Civil War history. Although I'm from Hawaii, I lived a couple of years in Biloxi, Mississippi. I have a lot of family there. And so I have a bit of a fascination with the Civil War. There's actually a Civil War podcast that I've been listening to called Uncivil, which is super interesting. Lots of really interesting stories that kind of change the way that I think about things. And also, I've been reading this book recently. It's a biography of Ulysses S. Grant by the same guy who wrote the Alexander Hamilton biography that got turned into the musical. This book it's huge. First of all, it's massive, but it's fascinating. It is so interesting. Not because Ulysses Grant is interesting. I mean, he's not that interesting. People think he was drunk all the time. He wasn't. But other than that, what I think is really interesting is just the period of time after the Civil War, the Gilded Age, which is a period of time that you don't really learn about, mostly because nobody looks good in that period of time, and so much of history is people trying to look good. How did the Republican Party go from a party literally founded with the express purpose of getting rid of slavery? How did that party become the party we know today? This is the story of how the Republican Party became the only party in power because the Democrats basically left the country to go start the Civil War. The Republicans were in power for decades at a time of enormous financial corruption, a time that's actually very similar to the time that we're living in today, and very quickly began to abandon the idea of doing anything for black people and really focusing instead on business and money. And that evolution is described in just real-time detail in this book, and it's just really opened up my eyes about this very, very dark but very important part of American history, which has just tremendous impacts on the way we think about the world today. So finally, let's talk about some of the greetings of Hawaii. You know aloha, right? You know aloha means hello, it means goodbye, it means I love you, or just love in general, right? Talk about I have much aloha for you, right? Aloha, they say, the most accepted etymology of aloha is that it means breath to breath, because the traditional Polynesian greeting is just sort of put your foreheads together and breathe the same air for a little while. And so it's, when you say hello to someone, you say goodbye to someone, or, when you talk about the love that, is between you, it makes sense to speak in those terms. But it's a very formal greeting in Hawaii, honestly. Outside of the tourism industry, it's not really a word that we use. I mean, we use it to mean love all the time, but we don't really use it to mean hello or goodbye most of the time. What we say is, how's it? That's proper Pidgin. How's it? Hey, brah, how's it? Hey, how's it with you? Except on the Big Island, where they say Wadascoops. Hey, brah, Wadascoops, Wadascoops! And then, of course, there's that most Hawaiian of hand gestures, the Shaka. Shaka looks like this, right? There's actually a Shaka emoji now, but I didn't use it because it's wrong. It's the California Shaka, which is kind of like this, like, hey, brah, Shaka. No, this is, it makes sense why Apple emoji would give you the California version of the Shaka, but this is a proper Shaka. A lot of people get nervous when they see Shaka because people throw it around in Hawaii so much that people start to think, like, is this like the Hawaiian middle finger? It's not. First of all, if you really look inside the Shaka as a gesture, it looks like this. It's a joke. No, it's like the opposite of a middle finger, right? It's like, somebody lets you in traffic. It's like, hey, Shaka, right? It's a proper hello. There's all kinds of different, you could be like strong Shaka, right? Friendly Shaka, hang loose. You go front Shaka, side Shaka. There's no wrong way to Shaka, except for this. And then finally, a very important Hawaiian word is mahalo. People come to the islands and they see mahalo printed on the front of all the trash cans. And so they think that mahalo means trash. You'll hear somebody say, hey, pass me your mahalo. I'll throw it away for you. But no, actually mahalo means thank you. So this is why it's a very important Hawaiian word. So thank you very much for your attention this morning. I'll see you at the luau.